When you die, everything that has been holding you together, your heartbeat, your breath, your brain activity, comes to a halt. It sounds simple, almost clinical, but what actually unfolds in those first few moments after death is a fascinating, almost poetic sequence that science continues to unravel. The process doesn't happen all at once. In the final seconds, as the heart stops pumping, blood flow ceases and the cells throughout your body begin to starve of oxygen. This lack of oxygen is what initiates the first stage of death, called clinical death. You're not yet decomposing, but your body is no longer maintaining itself. Within about 20 seconds, your brain cells begin to shut down. The electrical signals that once kept thoughts, memories, and sensations alive start to flicker out. Yet interestingly, research shows that brain activity doesn't simply cut off like a switch being flipped. In some cases, faint waves of activity have been recorded for minutes after cardiac arrest, suggesting that some form of consciousness or awareness might persist briefly even after the body appears lifeless. This has led scientists and philosophers alike to wonder, is there a small window of time in which the mind remains awake while the body dies? Some studies on near-death experiences seem to point in that direction, describing vivid sensations of leaving the body, seeing light, or reliving memories in rapid succession. Whether these experiences are purely neurological, caused by oxygen deprivation, or something deeper remains one of life's biggest mysteries. As the brain shuts down, other organs follow. The lungs stop drawing in air, and without oxygen, carbon dioxide builds up in the bloodstream, turning the internal environment acidic. Enzymes that once helped digest food begin breaking down your own tissues, in a process known as autolysis. The warmth fades from your skin as your body temperature drops roughly 1 degree per hour, a cooling known as algor mortis. Muscles stiffen due to chemical changes in the cells, creating the familiar phenomenon of rigor mortis. This stiffness typically begins in the smaller muscles, like those in the face and hands, before spreading throughout the body. It's around this point that the body begins to truly transition from a living organism to matter returning to the earth. Blood, no longer circulating, settles due to gravity, creating purplish patches on the skin called livor mortis. Inside, bacteria that were once contained safely in your intestines begin to spread. These microorganisms start breaking down tissues from within, producing gases that cause the body to bloat slightly. Within a day or two, decomposition fully sets in. From a biological standpoint, death is less of an instant event and more of a slow unwinding of complex systems that once worked perfectly in sync. But beyond the physical decay, there's something deeply human about observing what happens when life leaves the body. For millennia, different cultures have treated this moment with awe, reverence, or even fear. In ancient Egypt, death was seen as a threshold to another realm, so the preservation of the body through mummification was essential to ensure the soul's safe journey. In more modern scientific terms, we now understand that the light people sometimes describe during near-death experiences could be caused by the brain releasing a surge of neurochemicals, possibly DMT, as it shuts down. Yet even this explanation doesn't strip away the wonder. If anything, it makes the experience feel even more mysterious. The brain's final act is one of vivid, otherworldly illumination. What's particularly haunting about the process of dying is how the senses fade away. Hearing is thought to be the last sense to go. Some studies suggest that even after the heart stops, people may still be able to process sounds for a short while. That's why loved ones often speak softly to those on their deathbeds. It's believed that, on some level, they can still hear. Sight and touch are usually lost earlier. The brain begins shutting down non-essential systems first, conserving what little energy remains until the very end. The body's last moments are remarkably quiet, yet there's a strange grace to it, the way the biological and the existential intersect for one final instant. From a purely material perspective, this is the end of the physical self. Your atoms and molecules, which have been borrowed from the earth for your entire life, are slowly returned to it. The same carbon, nitrogen, and calcium that built your bones and blood will one day nourish the soil, feed plants, and cycle through new forms of life. In a sense, the boundary between life and death isn't a wall, it's a recycling point. The universe doesn't waste anything. Every cell that dies becomes the foundation for something else to live. And yet, even as science can trace every step of the body's decline, there remains something inexplicable about the moment of death itself. The instant between the last breath and whatever comes next has fascinated humanity since the beginning of time. We can measure the fading heartbeat, track brain waves, even predict how long each stage lasts, but we can't quite explain what it feels like to leave existence behind. The scientific story stops at the body. The philosophical one continues with the mind, the soul, or whatever you choose to call that spark of awareness that makes you you. So when we ask what happens after you die, it's worth remembering that the after starts with this process, the transformation of life's energy into something else. The body doesn't just stop, it transitions. Whether you view that transition as a purely natural cycle or the beginning of a spiritual journey depends on what you believe about consciousness itself. But one thing is certain, death isn't as simple or as final as it seems. It's a process, not a moment, a bridge between what was once living and what will live again, in some form, somewhere, somehow. If the first stage of death is about the body shutting down, the next question that naturally follows is, what happens to consciousness? When the heart stops beating and the brain's electrical signals fade, does awareness simply vanish, or does it continue in some form beyond the physical body? This is where science, philosophy, and spirituality all meet in a fascinating, sometimes uneasy conversation. For centuries, humans have been trying to understand whether the mind is merely a product of the brain or something far more mysterious, something that can exist independently of it. From a scientific standpoint, consciousness is often described as the result of billions of neurons firing in complex patterns, producing thoughts, memories, emotions, and self-awareness. When those neurons stop functioning, traditional neuroscience says consciousness ceases. In that view, death is the end of subjective experience, like a candle's flame being extinguished when the wax runs out. Yet even among scientists, this explanation doesn't fully satisfy everyone. For one thing, no one has ever been able to precisely define or locate consciousness. We can measure brain activity, track neural pathways, and map emotions to certain regions, but the feeling of being alive, the inner experience of I am, still eludes full explanation. That mystery leaves room for other interpretations. Some researchers studying near-death experiences have found that people who were clinically dead, without heartbeat or brain function, have reported vivid, detailed perceptions of their surroundings. They've described floating above their bodies, observing medical teams trying to revive them, or traveling through tunnels of light toward overwhelming feelings of peace. These accounts are remarkably consistent across cultures and time periods, which makes them difficult to dismiss entirely as random hallucinations. Still, skeptics argue that such experiences can be explained by the brain's chemistry under stress, perhaps caused by oxygen deprivation or the release of powerful neurochemicals that create intense visual and emotional sensations. Even so, some of these cases challenge easy explanations. In a few documented instances, people who were flatlined for minutes reported details about their environment, objects or conversations, that were later verified by witnesses. If their brains were truly inactive, how could they have observed anything? This is the puzzle that keeps the conversation alive. It forces us to question whether consciousness might not be confined to the brain, but rather connected to it, like a signal that can persist briefly even when the receiver is turned off. Philosophers have long wrestled with this idea. The materialist view holds that consciousness is a byproduct of physical processes, inseparable from the brain. Once the brain stops, so does the mind. But dualist and spiritual perspectives propose something different, that consciousness is fundamental, perhaps even the foundation of reality itself, and that the brain is merely a vessel that allows it to interact with the physical world. In that sense, death isn't the destruction of consciousness, but its release. Some Eastern philosophies, like Hinduism and Buddhism, describe this release as the continuation of the self's energy or awareness into new forms, reincarnation, rebirth, or dissolution into a universal consciousness. Modern science hasn't proven these ideas, but it hasn't disproven them either. Quantum physicists sometimes describe the universe in terms that sound almost mystical: energy that cannot be created or destroyed, particles that exist in multiple states at once, or observers whose awareness seems to affect what they observe. Some thinkers have suggested that consciousness might be a fundamental property of the universe, like gravity or time, rather than an accidental product of evolution. If that were true, then death wouldn't mark an end to awareness, but rather a change in its form, like water turning to vapor. It's also worth noting how personal experiences shape our understanding of what consciousness might be. People who have gone through near-death experiences often describe profound transformations afterward. Many say they lose their fear of death, gain a deeper appreciation for life, and feel a strong sense of interconnectedness with everything around them. Whether these changes are spiritual awakenings or psychological responses to trauma, they suggest that facing death, even briefly, can shift one's perception of consciousness itself. It becomes less about individuality and more about connection, about being part of something vast and continuous. Across different cultures, this question, what happens to the you after death, has inspired countless stories and beliefs. In ancient Greek thought, the soul was believed to leave the body and journey to the underworld, carrying the essence of a person's identity. In Christianity, the soul moves on to heaven or hell, depending on one's deeds and faith. In Buddhism, there is no permanent self, only the continuation of karma and consciousness in new forms. Despite their differences, these beliefs all share one striking similarity: the conviction that something persists beyond physical death. Perhaps this reflects a universal intuition, that consciousness, in some form, transcends biology. From a psychological perspective, believing in continuity after death can offer comfort and meaning. It helps people make sense of loss and gives life a sense of purpose. But even beyond comfort, it speaks to something deeply human: the desire to understand our own awareness. We are, after all, the only creatures we know of who can contemplate our own mortality. The ability to ask, what happens to me when I die, may itself be evidence that consciousness is more than the sum of its parts. And maybe that's the real mystery. The very fact that we can wonder about consciousness, ponder where it goes, imagine it traveling somewhere beyond, might hint that it isn't confined to our physical limits. Whether you believe that awareness fades into nothingness, merges into the universe, or continues as an individual soul, death challenges us to think about consciousness not as something fragile or fleeting, but as something profound and potentially eternal. So when the body stops and the last breath leaves, perhaps consciousness doesn't simply vanish. Maybe it shifts, changes frequency, transforms, or reconnects to whatever source it came from. No one can say for sure, and maybe that's the beauty of it. The question of what happens to consciousness after death remains one of the deepest mysteries of existence, one that bridges science and spirit, reason and faith. It reminds us that even as we search for answers, the very act of wondering keeps us alive in the most human way possible. After exploring what happens to the body and the mysterious question of consciousness, we inevitably arrive at the heart of humanity's oldest and most enduring inquiry: what comes next? Across every culture, every belief system, and every era, people have tried to answer the question of what happens after death. Is there a heaven waiting for us, a cycle of rebirth, or simply nothingness, a peaceful end to existence? The sheer variety of afterlife theories shows just how deeply this question touches the human spirit. It's not just curiosity, it's a search for meaning in the face of the unknown. For billions of people, the concept of an afterlife isn't just a hope, it's a conviction. In Christianity, for example, death is not seen as the end but as a passage to eternity. Those who have lived according to God's will are promised heaven, a place of peace and reunion with the divine, while those who have turned away face separation from God, often interpreted as hell. This framework gives life a clear moral direction: the choices you make now echo into eternity. It offers both comfort and accountability, the idea that love, kindness, and faith have everlasting significance. For many, it's this belief that transforms death from something terrifying into something sacred, even necessary: a return home. In contrast, traditions like Buddhism and Hinduism view death through the lens of rebirth. Life and death are seen not as opposites but as stages in a continuous cycle called samsara. When one life ends, another begins, shaped by karma, the accumulation of one's actions and intentions. In this view, death isn't final, it's more like changing clothes. Your essence, your consciousness, moves into a new form, carrying lessons and unresolved energies from past existences. This idea not only explains the diversity of human experience but also invites personal responsibility. Every choice you make contributes to the quality of your next life. The ultimate goal isn't to live forever, but to reach liberation, moksha or nirvana, a state beyond rebirth, where the soul merges with the infinite and suffering ends. Then there are belief systems that take a more symbolic or philosophical approach to the afterlife. Ancient Egyptians believed that the soul underwent a judgment process after death, where one's heart was weighed against the feather of truth. If it was light, the soul entered the field of reeds, an eternal paradise mirroring life on earth but free of pain and struggle. If heavy with wrongdoing, it faced destruction. This vivid imagery reflected a deep moral understanding. The soul's fate is shaped by the integrity of one's life. Similarly, in many indigenous and animistic traditions, death is seen as a return to the earth, a rejoining of the spirit world where ancestors guide the living. In those worldviews, the boundary between life and death is thin, and communication between realms remains possible through dreams, rituals, or nature itself. Even in secular or scientific contexts, where the afterlife isn't tied to religion, there's still an enduring fascination with what remains after we die. Some materialists see death as the ultimate peace. Consciousness simply ceases, like a deep, dreamless sleep. There's no fear, no pain, no awareness. For those who hold this view, the meaning of life comes not from what happens afterward, but from what we do while we're here. Legacy becomes a kind of immortality, the memories we leave behind, the lives we've touched, the changes we've made. Our atoms return to the universe, our energy disperses, and in that sense, we continue to exist, just not as individuals, but as part of everything. Interestingly, despite the vast differences between these beliefs, they all share something profound: they give death a purpose. Whether it's a test, a transition, or a transformation, the afterlife, real or symbolic, acts as a mirror reflecting how we view life itself. For those who believe in heaven or paradise, life is a journey toward reunion with something greater. For those who believe in reincarnation, it's a classroom, each lifetime a lesson in compassion, humility, and growth. And for those who see death as final, life becomes all the more precious, every moment an opportunity to create meaning in the here and now. Modern interpretations of the afterlife often blend science, spirituality, and psychology. Some suggest that consciousness might persist in a non-physical dimension, perhaps in a quantum field or informational pattern that science hasn't yet understood. Others think of the afterlife metaphorically, as the continuation of influence and memory, the way your love, ideas, and energy ripple through the lives of others long after you're gone. Even in the most skeptical view, there's a quiet beauty in the idea that you become part of the cosmic cycle. Your atoms feed new stars, your energy fuels life, and in that way, you never truly disappear. What's striking is how universal the yearning for continuity is. We all want to believe that the essence of who we are, our thoughts, our connections, our love, doesn't just vanish. Maybe that's why the idea of the afterlife persists across time and culture. It's less about fear of death and more about the hope that life has meaning beyond its limits. Even when we can't prove what comes next, we feel that something about us is too intricate, too conscious, too aware to simply dissolve. In the end, every theory of the afterlife, whether spiritual, philosophical, or scientific, reveals something about humanity's deepest values. Heaven speaks to our longing for justice and reunion. Reincarnation reflects our faith in growth and balance. Materialism expresses our reverence for the tangible, for the universe as it is. Each of these beliefs, in its own way, offers a different kind of comfort. Perhaps the truth isn't confined to one view at all. Maybe it's more like a spectrum, where each belief touches on a fragment of something larger, something we can sense but not fully see. So when you think about what happens after you die, it's not just about where you might go, it's about how you live now. The stories we tell about the afterlife are really stories about life itself, about purpose, morality, love, and connection. Whether you believe in heaven, rebirth, or peaceful oblivion, the question remains the same: what will you do with the time you have? Because in every version of the afterlife, it's the life before it that truly defines what comes next. When we talk about death, it's easy to focus on what we lose, the body that stops working, the consciousness that fades, the mystery of what comes after. But the deeper truth is that thinking about death inevitably turns our attention back toward life. Every culture, every belief about the afterlife, every scientific theory about what happens when we die, all circle back to the same unspoken question: how should we live knowing that we won't live forever? Death, in a strange and powerful way, becomes a teacher. It strips away everything unnecessary and leaves us with what really matters. The awareness that life is finite changes the way we experience it. When you truly understand that time is limited, moments begin to glow a little brighter. A simple conversation, a sunset, laughter with friends, these things suddenly feel fragile and sacred. The impermanence that once frightened us becomes the very reason to appreciate everything more deeply. The philosopher Alan Watts once said that trying to hold on to life is like trying to hold your breath: you have to let go to live fully. Death gives life its shape, its urgency, and its meaning. Without it, every moment would stretch on endlessly, and meaning would dissolve into monotony. Throughout history, the contemplation of death has inspired art, philosophy, and spiritual growth. The Stoics of ancient Rome practiced memento mori, the reminder that, you must remember you will die. To them, thinking about death wasn't morbid, it was motivating. It reminded them to focus on what they could control, to act with virtue, and to let go of trivial worries. They saw mortality as a compass pointing toward a more intentional life. Similarly, Buddhist monks sometimes meditate beside graves or even on the image of their own decay, not out of despair, but to cultivate detachment and compassion. When you realize everything passes away, it becomes easier to let go of anger, greed, and pride. You stop taking life so personally and start participating in it more fully. In a more modern sense, awareness of death often leads people to rethink their priorities. You hear it from those who've had near-death experiences all the time. After coming close to dying, they stop chasing material success and start cherishing connection, creativity, and kindness. They talk about how little the external achievements matter in the face of mortality. What matters, they say, are the moments when they felt most alive, when they loved deeply, helped others, or simply felt present in the world. Facing death doesn't diminish life, it deepens it. It strips away illusion and leaves you with truth. Our relationship with legacy also reveals how deeply death shapes human behavior. On some level, we all want to be remembered. We build families, write books, create art, start movements, or simply leave behind acts of kindness that ripple through generations. It's a way of saying, I was here. My life mattered. Legacy is our attempt to defy impermanence, to pass something of ourselves into the future. Even for those who believe in no afterlife at all, there's comfort in knowing that our influence, our energy, lives on in others. The words you say today might echo in someone's heart long after you're gone. The love you give now might heal a person who passes that same love forward. In that sense, immortality is not about existing forever, it's about continuing to matter. At the same time, thinking about death can bring a strange kind of peace. It reminds us that everything, joy and sorrow, success and failure, is temporary. That realization can soften the edges of fear. Instead of clinging to life, we learn to flow with it. Instead of worrying about control, we find gratitude in the moment. There's an honesty in accepting mortality that frees us from pretending we have all the time in the world. When you stop running from death, you start walking closer to life. Some people find meaning in preparing spiritually for death, making peace with themselves, their loved ones, and the world. Others find meaning in simply living well, being kind, curious, and fully present. Whether you see death as a gateway to something greater or simply the closing of your personal story, it calls you to live in alignment with what feels real and good. The awareness that everything ends doesn't have to be sad, it can be clarifying. It can remind you that love matters more than pride, that time matters more than money, that experiences matter more than possessions. When you think about it, life itself is a series of small deaths. We die to childhood, to old dreams, to moments that never come again. Every ending makes room for something new. In that way, death is not just a final event, it's a principle woven into existence. The trees shed their leaves so they can bloom again. Stars collapse and give birth to galaxies. The universe is constantly recycling itself, and we're part of that cycle. So maybe the lesson death offers isn't about fear or loss, but about participation. To live is to take part in an endless transformation where nothing truly disappears, only changes form. And perhaps that's the greatest irony, it's death that gives life meaning, and life that gives death beauty. Without endings, beginnings would have no value. Without loss, love wouldn't feel as profound. The finite nature of existence doesn't make it tragic, it makes it precious. Knowing that every goodbye could be the last is what makes every hello worth savoring. In the end, what happens after you die might remain a mystery, but what happens before you die, that's entirely up to you. Whether or not there's an afterlife, the one thing you can be certain of is this moment, this breath, this heartbeat. How you choose to fill it is the real legacy you leave behind. When you live fully, love deeply, and give freely, you transcend death in the only way that truly matters. You become part of something larger, not because you live forever, but because your life, in all its impermanence, becomes a spark in the eternal story of existence. And maybe that, in itself, is a kind of afterlife.